Climate change is putting the world on the verge of a catastrophe. That's the stark warning from the United Nations Secretary-General, Ban Ki-moon.
Yes, the latest report from the UN's Climate Change Panel says some of the worst effects could still be avoided if action is taken now.
This is what it's all about, the gases changing our climate. Here to launch the report, no less than the United Nations Secretary-General, Ban Ki-moon. He's just seen for himself the effects of global warming in Antarctica, the first man in his position to make the visit, and the rate of melting there clearly disturbed him.
These scenes are frightening as science fiction movies, but they are even more terrifying because they are real. Ladies and gentlemen, slowing and reversing these threats is the defining challenge of our age.
Even as he was speaking, the people of Bangladesh are experiencing exactly what the scientists are warning about. A cyclone caused this widespread flooding. The death toll is mounting, and today's report says storms like this are set to become more violent and more dangerous as the sea level rises. The conclusions unveiled here are striking, and they may galvanize support for a new treaty cutting greenhouse gases. Talks are due to take place in Indonesia next month. In London, the Prime Minister says this report is a wake-up call.
We need a climate change agreement that is global, that is comprehensive, that is radical, and meets our ambitions that we have a 50% cut in carbon emissions around the world, and we'll do even better than that.
There are solutions. This experimental plant turns waste food into fuel. It's only a small example, but new technology can help cut emissions of greenhouse gases. The scientists are clear that with the right effort, we can head off the worst of global warming. David Schuckman, BBC News in Valencia.
After a week of painstaking political negotiations, today the content of the IPCC's synthesis report was revealed to the world. The stark warning to our political leaders that it's very likely humans are to blame for global warming, and unless we cut our carbon emissions, we could be facing catastrophic climate change by the end of the century.
Let us recognize that the effects of climate change affect us all, and that they have become so severe and so sweeping that only urgent global action will do. We are all in this together. We must work together.
By anyone's standards, it makes for disconcerting reading. But the 2007 synthesis report may prove to be one of the most crucial climate change documents ever published. Crucial because in 2 weeks' time, leaders from around the world will gather in Bali to decide how to tackle global warming over the coming decades, and the report will be their scientific guide. It's a compilation of the key findings of thousands of scientists who give unbiased advice to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Their remit to discover how human behaviour is affecting the world's climate and what must be done to minimise the impact.
Many of us hope now that the science is so overwhelming, that the message is so stark and that the implications are so dire that governments will now start to put some of their short-term political worries to one side and begin to cooperate for the future of humankind and indeed the rest of the natural world. Because the longer we leave this, the more serious will become the risk and the more expensive and difficult it will be to solve this problem.
Among the IPCC's gloomy findings this year, the temperatures will continue to rise by between 1.8 and 4 degrees by the end of the century. Sea levels are also likely to rise by up to 59 centimetres, and that's without taking into account water from melting ice sheets in Greenland and West Antarctica. Arctic summer ice is likely to disappear, they say, sometime after 2050. And it's likely the world will also see an increase in heat waves, and extreme weather events may become more intense. But however stringent the research and however stark the warnings, many are still worried that too many governments continue to place economic interests far above climate change mitigation and try to water down the scientists' findings.
The scientists are very agreed on what the main findings are. What you have to recognise at the IPCC is this big body of scientists, but the actual summary gets negotiated by politicians. So it's at that point that the politicians start to manipulate and dumb down the science, potentially. And what we're concerned about is that the report comes out with a very strong, clear message that was there in the original summary for policymakers.
In just 2 weeks' time, the world's political leaders will gather for the UN's Climate Change Conference, at which they'll start negotiating a successor to the Kyoto Protocol. The hope is the warnings contained in today's Synthesis report will ensure the international momentum for cutting our carbon emissions doesn't melt away. Catherine Jacobs, Sky News.
Well, the warnings in the report are pretty dire. With me now is one of the authors, Bettina Mene of the World Health Organization and the Regional Office for Europe. What are the impacts going to be on health?
We are projecting that 1 million of people could be at risk, actually, in particular for an increase in the frequency of extreme weather events like heat waves, droughts and floods. So that could be resulting in increased mortality and morbidity and, of course, injuries. Further, the temperature increases, in particular in Africa, but also in other continents like Asia and Latin America, could be leading to increased malnutrition, in particular. If with higher temperatures, the crop availability will be actually reduced, as we could be seeing from the models. Further, there might be a shift in the distribution of infectious diseases. Currently, more evidence is available with regard to some vector-borne diseases like malaria and dengue.
So people across the world will be affected in some way in terms of their health?
Yeah, we count that everybody actually in the world would be affected. Now it depends, of course, how you are dealing with that personally, as dealing with your personal health and your health status, but also, of course, depends on how much access you do have to information, to healthcare systems, the development of the health system itself, whether you have access to clean water and sanitation, to clean energy, and so forth. So the adaptive capacity, that's how we call it in this report, is very much depending on where you live, where you work, where you breathe.
What can countries' health systems do to try to adapt and to try to prepare?
First of all, health systems need to be strengthened. They also need to be medical professionals play a key role in the forefront of dealing with these problems, because they see the people which are affected. And they're also in the forefront because they can inform the people on what to do. For example, how to change behaviors, but also on which win actions are available for greenhouse gas reduction measures, for example. And so, as I said before, health systems need to be strengthened almost everywhere. And it would be very good that health systems know in advance on what actually could be happening. So in this line, it's very important that health systems work together with other partners, which actually can provide some additional information in order to take informed action in advance.
Bettina Mene, thank you very, very much. And of course, human health, just one of the areas likely to be impacted by climate change. And as we've said earlier, the consequences could be very, very serious if the world doesn't act urgently.